This video is on how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. If a quadratic expression is written in the form x squared plus bx plus c, that is, if a is equal to 1, then its related equation can be solved by completing the square. This means that we want to write one side of the equation as a perfect square trinomial. Then we can factor that perfect square trinomial and take the square root of each side of the equation in order to solve it. Sounds a little complicated, but here are the steps that we're going to follow. First thing we want to do is move the existing value of c to the right side of the equal sign. Then we need to find a new value of c that's going to make the left side of the equation a perfect square trinomial. And that value of c is b divided by 2 squared. So take the value of b, divide it by 2, and then square that number. We're going to add this to each side of the equation. Now we're going to be able to factor the left side of the equation because we made it turn into a perfect square trinomial. So it will factor into a binomial squared. Then we're going to take the square root of each side of the equation. On the right side, we'll need to consider both the positive and the negative square roots of the number, and then it'll be very simple from there to solve for x. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. Here we need to solve each quadratic equation by completing the square. And I have x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 45. So the first thing I want to do, remember what I want to do is I want to make this side of the equal sign a perfect square trinomial. So I can factor it into something in parentheses, so like x plus 4 squared. To do that, I need to get rid of this value of c. So I'm going to add that to both sides of the equation. And notice I left a space where that minus 3 was because I need to find my new value of c that will make this a perfect square trinomial. So that is b divided by 2 and then square it. So b is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to add a 1 here and I'm going to add a 1 here. Now, x squared minus 2x plus 1 is a perfect square trinomial because I made it be that way. And it will factor into x minus 1 squared. If you don't remember how to factor perfect square trinomials, go back and watch the video on that. And that equals 48 plus 1, which is 49. Now I have a perfect square on this side of the equal sign, so I can take the square root of that. And over here, since I take the square root of one side, I have to take the square root of the other side. And I need to consider the positive and negative square roots. So the square root of the quantity x minus 1 squared is x minus 1, and that's going to equal plus or minus 7, because the square root of 49 is 7. That gives me two equations. X minus 1 equals a positive 7, and x minus 1 equals a negative 7. So x is equal to 8, and x is equal to negative 6. So that's how to solve by completing the square. Let's take a look at another example here. Here I have x squared plus 4x plus 8 equals 16. Again, I want to move my existing value of c to the other side of the equation. So that's going to give me x squared plus 4x equals 8. Leave a space for your new value of c. My new value of c is the value of b divided by 2 and then squared. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4, so I add 4 here and I add 4 here. Now this side of the equation has turned into a perfect square trinomial, and that factors into x plus 2 squared, and that's equal to 12. Now I want to take the square root of both sides, because remember, square rooting undoes squaring. And I square root this side, make sure I do the plus or minus, and then that gives me x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 12. The square root of 12, I'm going to move this up here. Square root of 12 can be simplified into 2 square root of 3, because 12 is 4 times 3. 4 is a perfect square, which is 2. And then I want to subtract 2 on each side. And my answer is going to look a little funny, but this is what it looks like. X equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 3. And that is two solutions, negative 2 plus 2 square root of 3 and negative 2 minus 2 square root of 3. So here are a couple practice problems I'd like you to try on your own. So stop the video and try these in your math journal. Okay, let's take a look at these two examples. First, I have 2x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 60. So I have a little bit of a problem here because remember at the beginning of this video I said that you can only complete the square if a, that is the coefficient of x squared, is equal to 1. But I can actually make that happen because I can divide everything in this equation by 2. So that's going to give me x squared plus 2x minus 5 equals 30. Now I can continue with completing the square since a is now equal to 1. So I want to add 5 to each side of the equation. That's going to give me 35. Find my new value of c, which is half of b squared, which is 1. So I'll add 1 to each side. This side factors into x plus 1 squared equals 36. Now I take the square root of both sides, and over here I take the square root of 36 plus or minus. That's going to give me, I'm going to go ahead and write it up here, x plus 1 equals plus or minus 6, which is x plus 1 equals positive 6, x plus 1 equals a negative 6, so x is equal to 5, and x is equal to negative 7. There are my two solutions. And let's take a look at our last practice problem here. X squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 15. So I'm going to subtract 1 from each side. X squared plus 6x equals 14. Now I need to find my new value of c. So I'll take half of b and square it. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So I add 9 here and 9 here. This side of the equal sign will factor into x plus 3 squared. 14 plus 9 is 23. Now I want to take the square root of both sides. The square root of the quantity x plus 3 squared is just x plus 3 equals, oops, I forgot my plus or minus, equals plus or minus the square root of 23. Since 23 is prime, that radical cannot be simplified, so my final answer is x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 23. Oops. 23. There we go. So in this video, we took a look at how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. The main idea behind it is we want to make one side of the equal sign a perfect square trinomial, so it will factor into a binomial squared, and then we can get rid of the squared by square rooting both sides and solving the equation.